Hello, welcome to the Brain Scrub, a somewhat improvised approach to mental health. My name is Glenn Sollers. Thanks for tuning in today. It has been a while since I recorded my last episode, and that is because I was on vacation to my favorite destination in the world, a city I adore, and I can never get enough of it, and that happens to be Mexico City. Not on a beach, in a city. And it's not like it's relaxing. However, the people are relaxing because there is such a strong community. There is no yelling that goes on. I never saw anybody have a fight. There's no curse words that happen. People are just nice, even in crowded subways. People are just friendly. They are living their lives, and I just admire it so much, plus all the beauty in Mexico City, the foods, the markets, the architecture, unbelievable. I always get really excited when I go there, and this was no exception. And what I want to focus on today is conflict, because I didn't see any conflict in Mexico City. And in fact, on the way home on our flight, there was a lovely lady who was a lawyer from Alberta, Canada, who was in family law, and she does high conflict divorce cases in a collaborative approach. And she and I got talking because of my situation that I'm in. And she referred me to a gentleman named Bill Eddy and his podcast, It's Not Your Fault. I listened to the podcast and I've been blown away by the content. And he focuses in on families, yes, but more so high conflict people. And 10% of the population in North America is high conflict. This is important to know because high conflict people do not deal with conflict the same way that a normal, and I'm just saying normal because normal is not that normal anymore, but the rest of the population, the 90% of the population, resolve conflict through active listening, through empathizing, through trying to understand both sides, to have the best solution come through in their discussion, to be open, to be curious, non-reactive, like all the healthy things that one expects in conflict does not happen with high conflict people. And if you bundle the high conflict with the personality disorders that Bill mentions in his podcast, such as borderline, histrionic, antisocial disorder, sociopathic, all these different things, you're in for trouble in terms of dealing with conflict. And there's many do's and do nots when you're dealing with people like this. And I want to give some examples. The reason I want to share this is in a lot of divorces, you might have somebody who is high conflict. And generally when alienation is involved, where the child says, no, I don't want to be with you anymore, or the other parent fights for custody of the child, there likely is an element of this in that relationship. And the ultimate loser is the child, because in these cases where there's extreme alienation or estrangement or whatever, the kids generally need to choose one side, and in a lot of cases, they will choose the side of what is called in this podcast, and in legal terms, the abuser. And they're starting to realize that things like alienation, definitely not healthy for the kids, but it's also abuse, domestic abuse, because the child is pitted against one parent. And of course, in normal conflict situations, in normal marriages, one would work through these problems and figure out a way, how can we both be with the child, work through the problems as adults so the child's not impacted. And in a lot of cases, that doesn't happen. One person wins, one person loses, but ultimately the child loses in the long run. And they may not realize that until they're like in their mid-20s, 30s, sometimes in their 40s. Sometimes they never realize it. But there's some things to really be watching out for if you are dealing with people that are high conflict and if they have some sort of personality disorder, because the normal way of dealing with things doesn't work. Like, for example, expecting them to work through a problem, not going to work. Expecting them to not have an emotional reaction, not going to work. Thinking that they're telling the truth, that may not work. People with these disorders want to win sometimes at all costs. And it's not that they're bad people. This is one thing I've learned through listening to the podcast. A lot of these folks that have high conflict personalities and or personality disorders have some sort of genetic thing that's going on, or they had an experience as a child that may have led to this, such as not having a parent in their life, such as being abused. These things can have a negative impact on a child, and really it's not their fault. This is how they've been programmed. So when they grew up, they had to deal with certain things. And can you imagine not having a parent in your life? As an example, like maybe your parent dies, maybe they leave, I don't know what. But to be with one parent is okay, but then what might happen in a child's mind if they know that there's another parent out there, but they just don't want to be with them? And the kind of stories one must tell themselves in these situations. It's so sad that this kind of stuff happens. And I think what should be mandatory in the world, especially in Canada, because Canada, our judicial system is flawed in some cases where judges don't know much about this. Maybe there's judges out there that do know a lot about this. However, the judicial system doesn't normally, from what I understand, take this kind of stuff into consideration when a parent is trying to fight for custody. In my case, my child was 13 and the judge said, there's nothing I can do. If your child doesn't want to be with you, I can't force them to be with you. I felt powerless. And in fact, I should have fought it, and I didn't. I was so stressed out by the whole thing, and I thought, I can't win this. I had to let it go and just go for what's called radical acceptance. I had to accept that this is the way it is right now. And I've been trying to see my son. I've been fighting to see my son. I've been doing everything I can. I was desperate. But wow, did I do a lot of the wrong things. So I want to give you some signs and just some tools and techniques, what to do and what not to do when you're dealing with somebody who's high conflict. The first thing is, know that they may have some possible self-esteem issues or abandonment issues. And that can play out because sometimes people who are high conflict people will want to fire you, so to speak, or cancel you before you cancel them, because they've been canceled by somebody else. Like when I was talking about maybe your parent left when you're younger. Essentially, a child would feel, well, they left me. So in order to protect oneself, what we may do is we may cancel other people or get rid of other people before they find us out. And it just gives us more power. Is that they become dependent on others to live. That they need somebody else there who needs them because it makes them feel good. And this is another thing to watch out for if you're in a relationship where you might be going through a divorce. Are you seeing some of these things happen? They might have reactions. They'll go from black to white, or they'll think black and white thinking. There's no gray zone in between. They're going to lose their cool. They're going to get upset. And then the next minute they're going to be happy. So there's this back and forth. They may be violent in terms of throwing things, in terms of pushing, shoving, yelling, screaming. So very unpredictable. And that is also a sign of high conflict. They have a history of blaming other people. It's never their fault. So that's why therapy may not work or counseling may not work, because they're not the problem. Everybody else around them is the problem. So you can't win. what I've learned just through what I'm learning on podcasts is you never want to apologize to these people, because then you're telling them, indeed, you're right. I am the problem. And that's what they want. They'll twist stories around. They'll hear different things. They'll twist it around so it aligns with them. So they're very rigid in terms of their way or the highway. So they lack critical thinking skills. They lack problem solving skills. They're very resistant to change. They don't want to be called out. You never want to tell somebody who has a personality disorder that, I think you have a personality disorder. And they're going to deny it. And they're going to get upset. It doesn't solve anything. So with anybody who has a borderline personality disorder or any high conflict situation or some sort of disorder, you need to set ground rules, set boundaries, appreciate that this may have come from somewhere in their life and not to blame them, but you have to manage it accordingly. And to use what's called, and Bill Eddy talks about this, the BIF format in communication: brief, informative, factual, and firm. As brief as possible. Do not bring in any emotions. Do not bring in any adjectives. You're just getting to the point. To set boundaries for yourself as well. What's acceptable, what's not acceptable. If they bring up something and they're trying to fight back at you, to make sure that you ask them for evidence. Can you please show me proof of this in a non-adversarial way? You have to really manage your emotions when you deal with high conflict people, because they, I think, feed off the high emotions of others, because they're getting at you. And if you can deal with them rationally as a calm human being who is just advocating your opinion without any passion or pushiness behind it, you're more likely to succeed. These folks can also be very manipulative. They will be so nice to you when they need something, but you have to watch yourself. So if you're falling into this kind of thing in your relationship, set your boundaries. They also could use threats, and that's a problem, because then one has fear over speaking their truth to the person who's doing this. That's not healthy. And if you think about some of the high conflict situations out there where children are involved, this may cause a lot of fear for them. What I heard on one of the podcasts was they were just sharing some stories about other individuals out there and how the child was so afraid to leave the other parent because they felt, wow, you know what, you have emotional turbulence and I better stay with you. My other parent is fine, but I need to stay with you and take care of you because you need me. And that's what the other parent wants likely as well, is that they're needed, that they're loved, and their child's there supporting them. But unfortunately, the other parent loses, and eventually the child loses as well, because what can happen is history repeats itself. The child doesn't necessarily learn how to solve their own problems, how to deal with the other parent. They're taken away from the other parent, so they don't know how to deal with different types of individuals. So it creates more instability in their future, which is unfortunate, because both parents are important. In fact, everybody's important. And I think that's one of the key things to remember in conflict. Most of us want the best for the other person. Most of us are reasonable people. Most of us have learned how to deal with conflict through our history, but it's just how we deal with the conflict that's important when you're dealing with a high conflict individual. There are things you do, and there are things you don't do. Here's my ask. Next time you're dealing with somebody who you feel is being completely unreasonable, consider that they may have a personality disorder. And it's fine if they do. There's nothing bad about them as long as you communicate the right way. So should you be experiencing this, listen to some podcasts or read up on information on how to deal with different personality disorders. because the person's just doing what they're doing. And it's up to us sometimes to adjust ourselves so that we protect ourselves, we resolve the problems in an effective way, we set boundaries so that we can all get along to the best of our ability and make sure that we have healthy families, healthy children, and healthy community. And like I mentioned, when I was in Mexico, that's what I experienced. Folks, thanks for listening.